Hey everybody, it's Robot here, Vespa Motorsport, and here in San Diego, or scooterwest.com for a mail order parts operation. Here I got a vintage Vespa Smallframe. I don't think it's a 67, but it's a Vespa 50. It was restored somewhere in the Far East at some point. So kind of mechanically it's a little iffy. I've been fixing a lot of little issues with this scooter to kind of get it going. But I've got it to a point where it runs, but it's got an issue where the clutch slips. It's pretty common on the small frame scooters, especially once those clutch plates start hardening. This one's a Vespa 50, 4-speed, but the clutch slips so badly that I can't even kickstart the scooter easily. You know, a lot of times it kind of doesn't kick all the way through to get a full revolution, and I can feel it in the Kickstarter. So I'm gonna go in there. It's most likely just going to need new clutch plates and a clutch spring. I took the scooter on a test ride. Being a Vespa 50, you don't really notice the clutch slips. It's kind of a lower power scooter. On the Primaveras, the 125 Primavera small frames, you'd notice the clutch slip a lot sooner. Of course, with the small frames, there's a lot of pretty high performance upgrades for them. I'm not going to talk about that. This is just pretty much bone stock Vespa 50 with a little 16mm carb and a 4-speed. So I'm going to pop the clutch cover off and show how to change out the clutch on this. If you haven't watched our videos, I have a whole bunch more videos on both vintage Vespas and the modern ones. You know, subscribe to our channel, kind of follow us. I'd love to do a lot more on the vintage ones, but oftentimes they take up quite a bit of my time, and unfortunately, I think more of our modern ones get watched than the vintage ones. But I want to give the vintage bikes some love as well, as I love them. So say you're going to jump into doing a clutch job, whether it be on a vintage Vespa small frame or the larger Vespas, such as a P200. First, it's a good idea to start with the parts and gaskets, everything you need. On our website, we've put together kits that include all the parts. So you don't need to look up the individual parts. So you can type clutch kits, and you can see for the various scooters, there's different kits that we have available. The one I'm looking for today is going to be the small frame kit. So it's clutch kit small frame, or SF. And I'll show you an illustration of what's included with that kit. You're going to get the spring, the steel plates, the 3 cork plates for a stock small frame clutch, the pressure plate, the push pin, which on some later small frames they've changed the part on that, the clip that retains the pressure plate, a new clutch nut, and the tab washer that locks that nut in place. We also offer a little discount when you buy these complete kits. We also have a deluxe one that includes the specialized tools that you need to remove the clutch. Also not shown in that illustration is the gaskets required. They're also included with the clutch kit. So on the small frame, the clutch cover is located on the left-hand side, right behind the rear tire. It's pretty much all the scooters, just a little bit different arrangement on the small frame. First of all, I have the front clamped. I put a jack here so I can lift the rear end to get a little more clearance. I'm going to get the rear wheel out of the way, and I'm also going to lower the engine just slightly to allow for a little extra clearance. And on the rear, we have the lower shock bolt, usually a 14mm. You may have some other type of bolt that could be different. So I have 2 14mm wrenches. And before you jump into replacing the clutch, you want to make sure your cable's in good condition. If not, this would be a good time to change out the clutch cable itself. Oftentimes you just need to change out the inner cable. And you can see that motor dropped a little bit. If I remove the carburetor, I'd be able to drop the motor even further, but I think it will be pretty simple to remove the clutch without needing to drop the motor all the way down. So this is the old style wheel that has the 4 lugs. Most later small frames have just a more traditional 5-bolt outer style wheel. And sometimes you need to deflate the tire to get it past the clutch, or past the muffler there, that is. So if it was an ET3 or you had an aftermarket pipe, sometimes you'd remove the whole muffler. But underneath here, this is your clutch cover right here. Next, I'm going to get rid of the rear brake. And on this style, the drum is separate from the rear hub. The later ones, the whole entire drum is also part of the rear hub. It's a little different arrangement on this older small frame here. So I'll go ahead and remove the cotter pin. If you don't have an impact wrench, you could also have the tire down. You can crack this nut before you, so you have the tire against the ground, giving some resistance to go against. Right now, this will spin, but the impact wrench puts enough load that will just zip it right off. Pull the center hub off and set all these parts aside. You're going to need a 13mm or 14mm socket to remove the 3 bolts. This would be a perfect time to replace the oil seal on the rear hub if it has an oil leak. And right now I still have the rear brake cable connected, because oftentimes you could pull this right off and tip this over. You see a little bit of the gear oil is dripping out. You can also drain the gear oil if you like. There's going to be 6 10mm headed bolts that you need to remove next. So I have a power ratchet, makes the job a little easier. You could just use a regular ratchet if you like. And I'm loosening these fasteners in like a crisscross pattern. There's not much load on this cover, so it's not too critical. So nice and easy. And you can see there's a couple different size screws, 2 longer ones and 4 short screws. The longer screws go in the lower position and the short screws go in the upper position. This push pad looks pretty good, and I noticed the angle of this actuating arm was pretty good. Oftentimes if this is worn out and the push pad's worn out, you'd have a problem with the actuator arm at the wrong position. It will end up cutting out your clutch cables. Other thing with the small frame, you can see there's a slot in it. It's a little bit mangled on this clutch cover. You could pull the whole clutch cover off if you like. You can pull the clutch cover off. You can see this tab is a little mangled here. And I'm just going to use a flat-bladed screwdriver to open up. Again, this scooter was restored elsewhere. You can see that thing's kind of on its last leg. I'll probably end up replacing this whole entire arm along with the O-ring seals in there. You see that's in pretty poor condition. So on the larger hole of this pressure plate, you can push down on the clip and pry out on the this thing. You can see the clip kind of retains this pressure plate, and when you press on that hole, you can release that little tang there. And underneath there, you can see the tab washer and kind of a not so nice looking rusty nut. You could take a punch or a chisel to open up the tab on you know, basically fold back the tab that locks the nut in place. And again, this is going to be pretty difficult to remove the old gasket. And this second gasket should just have one. There's probably some reason they put two on there. We'll find out. To remove this nut, the easy way to go about it is you could just impact it off. I think it's a 17mm socket. Or you can lock up the clutch by either wedging a piece of soft copper in between the primary gear and this larger ring gear, and it will allow you to unscrew the nut, but will lock up the clutch. And that's all it takes. And in the clutch kit includes a new nut. You can see this nut's in pretty poor shape. Go ahead and you can get a magnet or a needle nose and pull that mangled tab washer out. Maybe, I think it's in pretty poor shape. And what I'm going to do next is turn the clutch over. So the Woodruff key is pointed straight up. Otherwise, that Woodruff key is likely to drop into the bottom of the motor. So you can see that little slot, the keyway on the top of the clutch right there. Sometimes the clutches will come right off. With the deluxe kit, it includes the small frame clutch puller. So to remove the clutch, you'll need a puller. Sometimes they'll pop right off, but here's the factory puller. The deluxe clutch kit that includes a small frame clutch puller, and it threads onto the center hub once you have the nut and the tab washer out of the way. And you want to get it threaded on there quite a bit. This one's not threading on all that nice. So get it on there a couple turns, you know, until it's all the way seated. You don't want to have a puller halfway threaded. So there you go. It's all the way on there. And again, you could cheat, or you could use cheat with a air impact wrench or electric impact, or you can hold this with a pair of an open end wrench or a monkey wrench, and then turn that with a 17mm socket. So I'm going to go in with this. And it doesn't take much to pop. So I saw the whole clutch loosen up. And go ahead and get this out of the way here. And you may want to go back there and grab the Woodruff key with a magnet, you know, if you're worried about shaking it loose, but it stayed in place no problem. And I'm going to carefully pull that Woodruff key out. And actually it's staying in place. Sometimes they'll wedge themselves in place. But there's the Woodruff key. The one part you don't want dropping into the bottom of the motor. Before you go any further with the clutch job, you may want to check your basket. This basket doesn't look all that great. You know, it's got some good wearing on this edge right here. I don't know if the light will kind of catch it, but you can see the clutch plates have been eating into that basket there. It's not in that great a condition. Unfortunately, to change out this basket, you need to overhaul the complete motor. There's a circlip that retains this from the other side. You need to split the cases to pull this basket out. The problem with this scooter was not necessarily the basket, it just had clutch slippage, and that's the plates. I'll tell you, the 50 cc's are pretty tolerant to worn clutch parts, but when it gets to a point where you can't kick the scooter over easily, then it's time to overhaul the clutch. This is the clutch spring compressor tool. You could cheat it with some large washers, but it's nice to have the factory tool. And this works with both large frame and small frame clutches. Has one side that has a matching taper to the inner hub there, and then it's got a plate that goes in place of the pressure plate. Then you tighten the wing nut and compress the spring. And you can see now all the clutch plates are loose. And you can go ahead and pull this clip out. Sometimes the clips are pretty tight. You want to keep your finger over it just so it doesn't go flying across the room or in your eye. So once you derail the clip, they usually come out pretty simply. Be careful with these clips. They are pretty sharp sometimes and they will cut you. So pry the clip out of the way. Still looks to be in serviceable condition. Has a nice sharp edge on it. You can take the whole clutch and just dump out the plates. Plates look pretty new on it, but they slip like mad, so I'm going to go ahead and replace them. They may be kind of a subpar quality plate. So you got cork plates and steel plates, and they're identical. So you got, until you get to the last plate, which is this pressure plate right here. That's the whole sandwich of cork and steel plates sandwiches in here. The other thing I suspect that may be causing a clutch slippage is a spring, so I'm going to go ahead and replace the spring. This clutch inner hub, you can also see this has a small amount of wear. My screwdriver's not really catching the grooves too much, so I'm just going to leave it as is. As I suggested on the inner hub, it does have some pretty good grooves that cause for some clutch issues. Unfortunately, it requires a complete engine overhaul, and the budget for this project doesn't allow for that, unfortunately. I tend not to want to take in scooters like this, just because a lot of the Far East restorations they have, I don't know, I always tend to call them, they're like cans of worms. You just keep on finding issues with them, especially when it comes to the engine electrical systems. This scooter, I put all new control cables in it. I replaced the front brakes, rebuilt the front hub, new wiring harness, and that's kind of where we stand with it right now. And then now that I took it on a test ride, it's also got a new carburetor. Took it on a test ride, I noticed the clutch slippage. So there's the spring that I'm going to replace. So go ahead and grab all the parts and I'll be right back, and we'll clean all these parts and put them back in. So in the deluxe clutch kit, it will include the gasket kit. Only gaskets we're going to need out of this is the clutch cover gasket and also the rear hub gasket right here. There's the puller tool, or not the puller tool, the compressor tool that will compress the spring. Here's the small frame clutch tool that will thread onto the clutch inner hub and extract the hub from the intermediate shaft that's tapered. Will break the seal of the taper pretty much. The clutch spring. There's the clip that retains the pressure plate. The pressure plate itself. A new clutch nut and tab washer. The most important part, set of Surflex clutch plates. There's going to be 3 cork clutch plates in there. Be 2 standard steel plates. The end plate. And the pressure pin itself. And I'll show you the difference between the mangled one and the new one, and why you replace this part. It's kind of in pretty poor condition. And last, an oil cup that wasn't even included on this clutch. And this is what it does is the oil drips into this center and is distributed on the clutch. It was missing from this clutch, and that might be part of the clutch problems. And also a water key. Always have an extra one of those. Oftentimes they're easy to lose. Of course, you don't want to lose that in the motor. So I'm going to go ahead and reassemble the clutch. I'm going to reuse this hub, even though it's not in the absolute best condition. I'll tell you, if this was, if there was a budget for this, I would overhaul this whole entire motor based on the findings that I've observed with this motor here. So I'm going to start with the the clutch spring. So we'll take the new clutch spring. I'll show you the difference. So you got the new clutch spring. You know, it's about 2-3 millimeters taller. And as they wear, they kind of get compressed. You drop that right in the center there. And then you drop this, the last plate. And we'll go ahead and use the clutch compressor to compress this whole assembly here. So you kind of got to guide it so it drops, those slots drop right through. Don't get your fingers pinched. So the easy way to align the clutch plates is to use a brand new or used basket, just a separate basket that's separated from the gear. This is the basket that normally resides inside the engine. I think part number on this is 1106695, I think, for the basket. And the nice thing is you just drop that part right in. And after that, you can just drop your plates in and they'll all be aligned. It is possible to assemble the clutches without a basket, and I have done that in the past. So I'll start by adding a little oil to the core clutch plate. You can also soak these if you want. And all the core clutch plates are identical, each of the 3 plates. So you can drop that down on there. You see there's a little free play. We'll get that as centered as we can. Another small layer of oil. Drop a brand new steel plate. Not even worth really sanding the old steel plates. It is possible to reuse them, but why waste the effort? Again, another oiled clutch plate. Steel plate. And last cork plate. And I'll go ahead and put the new in, which is the last plate in the stack here, end plate or whatever they want to call it. And oftentimes it takes a little bit of work to get these all seated down. Use a small hammer or just tap everything down until it seats and exposes these ears here. Go ahead and drop this oil cup on. Again, making sure the ears are all exposed. And we can thread the clip in, get it underneath. Again, take extra care handling these parts as they're kind of sharp. The metal is really sharp on these, or the edges, that is. And the last part, you want to get the gap where it ends up underneath the one of these things. You can see that's not all the way seated right there, so you can just pry the clip right up against the oil cup right there. There we go, but I can see it's not all the way seated in these 2 grooves. Sometimes, the vintage bikes, they're always, a little finicky when it comes to messing with these parts. So you might need to tap that in. You don't want to put this back in because I can see it's not seated here, here, and here. It's seated on all this side here. So again, if you have trouble, make sure your clutch is all the way as tight as it can go. Give it a couple more taps, kind of get things seated. There you go, snapped in place there, and snapped in place there. Still needs to still snap in that one. There we go. So all the way around, it's snapped in all these grooves right here. Here's the next part. You can see there's a little free play while it's sitting in this basket. And like I suggested, you can also assemble the clutch without this basket. You just need to take a lot more care getting everything centered. And I just want to get it the best centered I can get it. I'll go ahead and pull it out and carefully unthread this tool here. Hold the bottom. And there you go. Now the spring tension is holding all these plates. If you're going to do it without the basket, you want to make sure all the plates are flush with this outer plate and these tabs are perfectly aligned. It's a little tricky, but after a couple tries you can do it. Again, I kind of cheated with the by using the basket. So there's our completed small frame clutch stack. Now it should grip pretty nice and tight when we put it back in. So I have the shaft, the intermediate shaft that drives the gears, facing straight up. I drop the Woodruff key right in place. I kind of have it just slightly sloped towards the front. Gotta be careful, because if you accidentally tip it, it could drop into the your gear case down there. So the trick is this part does not turn easily, the outer hub. So oftentimes you gotta look down your the hole that the tapered shaft goes through and kind of sight the Woodruff key. You know, and a lot of times I'll use a flashlight, kind of eyeball where the Woodruff key goes. Happen to drop right in pretty easily. Again, it's critical that all the plates are also lined up. If they're not, it's not going to drop into the basket easily. So I used the flashlight to sight the keyway that's in the clutch center hub and this intermediate shaft where that keyway situates. I moved my basket just ever so slightly, so I got them perfectly aligned. And once you do that and you know it's kind of situated over it, you could thread your puller back in and use something lightweight to carefully tap the clutch into place. And after you do something like this and get it all the way seated, you need to visually verify that the Woodruff key is still in there. And I see part of that half moon looking Woodruff key, it's still in place. So we're good right there. So this new tab washer has a tab that engages with the little ground slot that's pretty much at the 6 o'clock position on this clutch. So I'll go ahead and put that right in there and get that little tab perfectly lined up with that slot right there. Then I'll go ahead and I'm going to thread a new nut, as the other one was pretty mangled. Hopefully I don't have any issues threading this onto this shaft, as this shaft is in kind of not the best condition. Looks like it's threading on pretty good. And a 17 millimeter socket. You want to torque that to about 30 foot-pounds, and I'll show you how to lock up the transmission to easily torque that to 30 foot-pounds. So I'm going to go ahead and lock up this primary gear. We're going to turn this clutch counterclockwise, so on the left side I'm going to want to wedge a soft copper penny or some other copper piece, something copper or brass, which is much softer than the hardened gears. And the idea of this is it won't do any damage to the gears, but you'll be able to lock up the transmission to get an accurate torque onto this center nut. And I want to torque that to about 30 foot-pounds. And right there, about 17. And keep your fingers out of that. But the penny is going to take the grunt of the torque here and not damage the gears. And I'm going to go ahead and rotate the transmission back and get the penny out. Make sure you don't drop the penny in the bottom of the engine. See, it just made a little dent in the penny there. Didn't really do much damage. But we have the center nut torqued to about 30 foot-pounds. Next, you want to take a big flat bladed screwdriver and wedge it between this part and I'll kind of show you what I did. So I just wedged that and it made a really nice flat, and it pushed it right up against the nut. And that's what locks the nut in place. And another option is you can put red Loctite on it. It'd probably do the trick better than the metal tab, but the way they did it back in the 60s, they didn't have Loctite, and they had tab washers and cotter pins that held assemblies in place. I'm going to go ahead and put the new pressure plate, since I'm also putting a new plunger in there. You can thread the clip in place, so the two open ends go through the smaller hole, and the part that looks like a little hook will go into the larger hole. You need to use a needle nose or something to kind of lever that in place. It takes a little bit of effort because it's under spring tension. So I'm not going to push it all the way, and I'll go ahead and set that in place and then Now that that's in place, I can just snap that right in place, and now it's held in there. It's not going to drop out. There's been a couple different updates to the clutch cover. The best quality and best revisions of them were found on the Vespa PK series small frames and also the Vespa ET3. This is the older style. I think it's anywhere from the 60s all the way up to the mid 70s, something like that. And it's got this piece that's held in with a pin. There's an O-ring in here. I don't really want to mess with this because it's kind of on its last legs, and we no longer stock any of the replacement parts to rebuild this cover. You'd need to replace it with a complete cover of the updated design from the ET3 style cover. But I'm going to go ahead and reuse this. You could turn the lever over just a little bit, and you can drop the plunger right in there, and you can see it locks in place. And as you lever the plunger, it kind of protrudes out. You put a small amount of grease on this that kind of pre-lubricates it. And also this hole right here is oil is slung up to the top of the engine, and it trickles down this hole, and this little funnel piece dribbles oil inside the clutch assembly with that oil cup that I was talking about when I assembled the clutch. So that's pretty critical, and that's what lubricates the clutch on these scooters. So the replacement gasket, you can use a small amount of grease to hold it in place. There's no need to really silicone this in place. That's probably going overkill. It might seal a little bit better, but just grease all these surfaces, and that will be enough to kind of hold your gasket in place while you're bolting this cover back on. And approximately get the holes lined up best you can. We're pretty close right there. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and tip the cover right back in place. Start with the longer screws and the washers. These have wave washers. Sometimes they use just a regular lock washer. These bolts aren't in nice shape. If I was overhauling this complete motor, I'd probably replace all these bolts. Kind of ugly looking. Just the zinc plating that's on the outside of the bolts is broken down, and now they're just the bare steel, and that's why they've rusted. So I'm getting these all hand tight, and I'm not going to use a power tool to assemble this. We'll go ahead and just use a hand ratchet. So just snug them. If you want to torque them with a torque wrench, or about 7 foot-pounds is all you need on it. And oftentimes I've had the bosses in the engine case on these old engines stripped out. I've had to make repairs with a Healy coil insert. And there you go. See how the clutch works. We'll go ahead, and while we're under here, we can hook up the clutch cable and get the adjustment corrected. So the adjuster, you can see it's pretty far out when I was trying to troubleshoot the clutch. It's got a new cable, and oftentimes new cables, they'll stretch initially quite a bit. But what I'll do is I'll reset the adjuster to the minimum adjustment. So you could use pliers to actuate the clutch while you get the cable back into the groove. I don't know how much it's. There we go. And now that's in place. And there's a lot of free play right now. I want to get rid of that. I just want to have a little bit of free play. It only should move just a tiny bit before you hit the main spring. The free play that you feel is just the return spring right now. And that's what that is. It's just a return spring. When you have the majority of pressure, you're actuating against the main springs in the clutch. That tensions your clutch. So I could go about it two ways. I could either loosen the cable clamp and adjust it a little further. I can tell you it only needs a small amount of adjustment. Probably about that much, and that's it. So we'll go ahead and tighten the lock nut here for the clutch. This is a perfect time to make the adjustment as everything's exposed and easy to access. Go ahead and replace the gasket that goes on the brake back plate. Two different styles. Some of the much older small frames, actually, according to this year, it probably should have the 6mm studs, but maybe 67. I don't know what the real year of this thing is. Now, it seems like if anybody knows the the scooters that come out of Vietnam, a lot of times for some reason, they're always registered as 67s when they are in the States. So get that lined up. Replace all the flat washers and split washers. And we'll get in there with the 13mm socket. And keeping a little pressure on the socket so it turns easily. And if you want to torque these to a specific torque, I would say about 16 foot-pounds. And I would assume the gear oil level's still at a good level, even after we did this, because normally if it's at the correct level, it doesn't drain out of the end shaft. Go ahead and get the hub back in place. Put a little grease on the surface that rides on the seal there. There's also a large washer that I just dropped right out. See somebody had this thing, it was like a burgundy metallic at one point. And I'm gonna torque this, but I'm gonna wait until I drop the tire down on this. So next steps is I'm going to go ahead and install this hub. This is an old style hub. It's got this single hole right here that lines up with the 4 holes that mount the wheel, and also this little alignment peg that I'll get back in place. Get that kind of aligned as best we can. This is not critical, it's just there to hold the hub in place when you put the wheel on, and also lines up the wheel. All right. Again, this job's a little easier if you deflate the tire, because you'll be able to get it past the muffler a lot easier. So the motor is back up in the thing. There's a lock washer and a single nut. I'll tend to, normally you want to turn the nut, but since it's got a lock washer, oftentimes if you turn the nut, it will distort the lock washer. So it's best to about 30 pounds is all you need for that. All right, so I'm going to just torque just the 2 lug nuts to about 30 foot-pounds. Go between the 2. And now the center hub nut You can torque to approximately 80 foot-pounds. And the goal is to get one of the holes to line up with the shaft. So kind of look, see how we are. I just need to go a little bit more, so I'll over torque it just ever so slightly to get the hole to line up. And that was about 78 foot-pounds, so that's good. And now I have a hole lining up for the cotter pin. So it's important to use a correctly sized cotter pin, one that fits nicely in the hole. And there's not much room on these hubs sometimes to get one in there. So I'm using pliers. I'm gonna go ahead and fold the tab over. Use a small hammer to do the same thing. And if you want to cut that little tang, you can to make it cleaner. And that's how you install the cotter pin on this kind of application here. So I'll torque the last two bolts. And I got this funky bracket that's for that little center hubcap. 30 foot-pounds. 30, all right. Get all of my fingerprints off everything. It's hard to keep the white walls clean on the rear of a vintage Vespa. And we'll see how it works. First by kickstarting it, see if the Kickstarter no longer slips. So now let's see if it starts. Oops, this Kickstarter kind of bugs. It should be a different type of lever. Works. And you want to be careful the first time you engage the clutch. And it feels pretty good. It's fully disengaged. So I think it's going to be working pretty good. It goes back into neutral nice and easy. So I think it's working pretty nice. And most importantly, it now no longer slips when I kick the scooter through. Before, the clutch slipped so much you couldn't ever get a good solid kick on the scooter. So there you go. Probably shouldn't be riding it with no helmet on, but couldn't help myself. Clutch works good. Tried out all 4 gears. Being a Vespa 50, doesn't go all that fast in even 4th gear. First gear is like a 5 mile an hour, 2 mile an hour gear. It's pretty slow. But successfully got the clutch working on this older Vespa Smallframe. Hope everybody liked the video. It's kind of interesting doing it on a scooter that's pretty worn and finding other little extras, and that's kind of typical of any scooter. Any of these scooters, you know, they're 50, 60 years old, 40 years old, whatever. They're all pretty old at this point. So you're always going to be opening a can of worms whenever you do any sort of repair job on these old scooters. Subscribe to our channel, follow us on Instagram, Vespa Motorsport, or you can follow me, Robot Vespa. See everybody next time. Hope everybody likes the video.